Tonight on True Crime Talk. When Greg Scarpa was in his early 20s, he became a good fella for the Profaci family by swearing a blood oath to the mafia. Scarpa was a one-man crime wave who spent only 30 days behind bars, thanks to his status as the FBI's ultimate mafia insider. His standing as a prized informant freed him to engage in mayhem and murder, knowing he had a virtual license to kill with reckless abandon. This is just some of the story. We are thrilled to be talking with Jonathan Dyer here. He's got a great book coming out called Greg Scarpa, Legendary Evil. I love the title. We'll get into the title in just a second here. But Jonathan, introduce yourself to the audience. I understand that you have several books out that are of fiction, but this is your first dive into the world of true crime. Welcome to the show.
Thanks very much. Yeah, this is a book-length nonfiction piece for me, and first time, as you said. I've written a lot of fiction over the years, and this presented some new challenges, and was a very interesting project for me.
Greg Scarpa, Legendary Evil is the title. Great title, great choice. Why Legendary Evil?
Well, I think that the primary reason is that, as I point out at the beginning of the book, mafia capos, members, good fellows, whatever, they don't have a press team, people following them around. There isn't everything written down that they do like there would be for a rock star or a politician. And so a lot of information out there is word of mouth, is second, third hand, and it's not always easy to separate fact from fiction. And when the facts start merging with fiction, I think that's where legends arise. And I think that part of the Scarpa story is the legend of Scarpa, how to separate the fact from the fiction. And the fact that he was, frankly, an evil man, as described by many people that knew him very well, just adds to that legend. So therefore, Legendary Evil.
His adversaries nicknamed him the Grim Reaper.
Right.
I'm guessing, meaning if you see him, you might be the next one. How did he earn this, right? How did he earn this nickname?
Well, his mistress, Linda Shiro, has stated that when she first met him in 1962, he estimated by then he'd killed approximately 20 people, and he didn't give any details on that. And as I've detailed in the book, there are several murders that are absolutely attributable to him, and some that are pretty shocking. Some sort of almost capricious murders that the rest of us would just consider awful. Just how could he possibly do that? What sort of man could possibly do that? And Scarpa certainly had the reputation for using killing people as a way to solve problems. In fact, violence was kind of his go-to solution.
Talk about the Colombo family a little bit, because I'm not up to speed. I don't know a whole lot about the mafia. I understand there's 5 families that were prominent throughout mafia history here. He was a captain for a good period of time for the Colombo family. Is that correct?
Yeah, he was. And the Colombo family got its name from the leader who succeeded eventually Joe Profaci. So before that, it was really the Profaci family. Profaci died in the early 60s. And after a brief struggle for leadership, Joe Colombo became the leader. Scarpa had been a capo, which is kind of mid-management in the mafia world, under Profaci. But my understanding is that new bosses, family bosses, get to pick who their capos are going to be. And Scarpa's status as a capo was not re-upped under Joe Colombo. However, he was part of this Colombo's inner circle, and according to Scarpa's son, Scarpa had more influence than a capo would have had while Joe Colombo was alive. Joe Colombo was shot in the early 70s, and Scarpa maintained his Goodfellow status, which is, kind of the gang member status. And then shortly before he died, about a year and a half or so before he died, he was elevated to capo once again during the Third Colombo War. So he was a capo, wasn't a capo, then was a capo again.
Joseph Colombo was shot and killed at some kind of parade or downtown event.
Yeah, it was an Italian-American Civil Rights League unity rally. This was Colombo's brainchild, the IACRL, the Italian-American Civil Rights League. And a guy walked up to him and shot him, and he was immediately killed by Colombo's bodyguards.
Yeah, I think a few years back I had read some conspiracy theories on that assassination. Let's get into the civil rights, because this plays a big role in Scarpa, and then how it seems so strange because he's nicknamed the Grim Reaper. Mm-hmm. You title your book Legendary Evil, very fittingly. But he does do some good, in my humble opinion, right? He gets in bed with the FBI, and he's trying to help them solve some murders of people that were they were just down there trying to do some good work, and they were killed by the KKK.
Yeah, some of that's a little bit murky, and I go through it in my book. There are 3 different episodes that people have alleged Scarpa was involved in over time. And it seems pretty clear that at least one of those is an absolute certainty. Another one looks pretty clear, and the first of the 3 he probably wasn't involved in at all. And so, yeah, he's helping the FBI, which is, of course, for a member of the mafia, is absolutely forbidden to have any kind of contact like that with the FBI. But Scarpa did this at their request. It was fairly early on in the relationship that he had with the FBI. And I think probably the motivation for him was, as was almost always the motivation for Scarpa, either cash or an out card, getting in good with the FBI in case he got in trouble, or in most instances, a combination of both of those. So actually, I believe there's a movie coming out next spring that Mark Wahlberg is playing Greg Scarpa in one of these instances that Scarpa was down in Mississippi helping out the FBI.
I've seen some pictures of Scarpa online, and he looks like, of course, he looks like a mafioso, but he also kind of looks like Colombian drug lord. He's kind of mixed between those two looks going on. Well, so he's kind of playing both sides for a while, actually for a good deal of time, it appears. And that would be considered either highly dangerous, but also maybe a form of self-preservation, right? That it's an out card, like you had said, but if he is outed as being a snitch, then he could find himself in quite a deal of trouble. But being kind of the muscle and the Grim Reaper, I don't know. I just feel like he played both sides of the fence because he could, and maybe he had the upper hand on some of his criminal friends because of his reputation.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. He definitely played both sides, and he did it with a couple of different handlers from the FBI, a couple of different special agents, and it was a matter of enrichment. It was monetarily or financially rewarding for him, but it also, as I point out, and as some other authors have pointed out, it insulated him from punishment. And I think it's not a stretch to say that at some point, Scarpa understood that he had a license to kill, and that even though the FBI had informed him in the early 60s that that was a line he wasn't supposed to cross, in the 1980s and into the early 1990s, it was pretty clear to the FBI, at least in my view, that he had crossed that line, and crossed it on more than one occasion. And prior to his finally being arrested, he had only spent 30 days in jail. And remarkable for a guy who was involved not just in petty crime for 30 years, but very serious crime up to and including premeditated murder.
Yeah, playing both sides. Legendary evil, absolutely, because he's committing crimes, killing for his mafia family, but then he's working for the FBI and still murdering, even though told not to. Hey, that's the line you can't cross. And that doesn't mean anything to Greg Scarpa. He will cross the line, and he seemed to just get away with it.
Yeah, you're right. He absolutely crossed the line. He crossed it many times. And one of the things about Scarpa is that he was a master manipulator. He manipulated the people close to him. He manipulated people that were, at least on paper, much more sophisticated to him. I mean, he manipulated pretty much the entire New York office of the FBI. And these are all college-educated people. And Scarpa essentially finished high school, but that was it. And he was a master manipulator, and he used that to his advantage. And as I read page after page of FBI files, that just became clearer and clearer that how he was able to manipulate these guys to really present his point of view and to believe his point of view. It's remarkable considering the level of formal sophistication that he had as opposed to the people that he was dealing with.
How many people do we think that he actually murdered? I mean, what are some of the estimates that are out there? Did the FBI have a number? Do you have a number? How many kills do we think that he's responsible for?
It's frankly, it's all over the map. There are people out there that think he killed 150 people, and when you think about that, it's just that's a ridiculous number. And I'm not sure that Scarpa's own boasting in the early 60s that he had already killed 20 people. He'd been a good fellow for about 10 years by then. I mean, that's 2 a year, and that doesn't really sound like very much if you're an army, but if you're an individual, that's a lot of people to be killing and to be still out on the street and doing whatever you want. I don't have a specific number just because the record is so hazy, but I suspect it's somewhere in the 20 to 40 range altogether. But that's really my best guess, and it's not much more than that. Again, as I said, the people weren't keeping a scorecard, and particularly early on in Scarpa's career.
I do want to get into his work with the FBI a little bit more. Can you tell us about the murders that took place? And it seems to me like the FBI, they are going to use him to locate the bodies of these civil rights workers that were down in Mississippi, and have him try to use his own methods to locate the bodies of these victims that they couldn't find that had been killed by the KKK. Can you go into more detail about how those murders took place, why they took place, and then his involvement in helping the FBI with those cases?
Sure. The three civil rights workers were down in Mississippi assisting with a voter registration drive. This was, at the height of the civil rights movement. When Congress had passed a Civil Rights Act, and then in 1965, a Voting Rights Act. Anyway, these three men were down in Mississippi trying to register African Americans to vote. Mississippi, like much of the South, prior to the passage of the Voting Rights Act, had, due to the Jim Crow laws, very low registration rates among eligible voters who were African Americans. Anyway, these three guys went missing, and it became a national news story. And there was a lot of pressure coming from Washington, D.C., and from Hoover's office to solve these murders, and they couldn't find the bodies. And at the time, a guy named Anthony Villano, who was an FBI agent in New York, was Scarpa's handler. And so Scarpa was asked to assist because for a couple of reasons. One was they knew he was a tough guy, and they knew he might be able to get some information out of some of these people. And another was the FBI was restricted in terms of what it could do by the law. So they turned to Scarpa, and Scarpa's longtime mistress, Linda Shiro, actually went down with him, and it was her first time on a plane. And they went down to Mississippi. Scarpa interrogated a local Klan big shot in he used what we would call enhanced interrogation, threats, physical violence, to get the location of the bodies, which everyone presumed at this point that these guys had been murdered. And they had been buried in this earthen dam in Philadelphia, Mississippi. Finding the bodies was a very important moment for the FBI and for the United States in general in terms of the civil rights movement. And Scarpa was paid for his work, and the FBI was grateful. And there are separate FBI files on that don't focus on Scarpa, but separate FBI files that focus on that work that he did, and pictures of this sort of crude earthen dam where these guys were buried. And the whole thing was obviously tragic and awful, but it did resolve this unresolved mystery of what had happened to these guys and increase the amount of public horror about what was happening down in Mississippi.
I love the term that you just used, enhanced interrogation. I mean, really, it was beat the hell out of the guy, threaten him until he tells you exactly what you want him to say, correct?
Yeah, and there are about 5 different versions of how that enhanced interrogation went. And I think that the best conclusion from that is that there was physical violence involved and threats involved. And finally, Scarpa got what he wanted. The FBI got what they wanted. It's not entirely clear. I think that some of the stories that I've heard are, it's like anything else. Remember that old game, maybe a 5th grade teacher had to play telephone, where they'd start a message at one end of the room and see what it was at the other end of the room?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, these stories about what Scarpa did. I think each time the exchange happens, a little something gets added onto him, like he stuck a gun in his mouth. He said, I'm gonna shoot your head off. He threatened to cut the guy's scrotum off. He actually started cutting. It's, again, I think by the time we're looking back 5 or 10 years from now, he will have cut the guy's scrotum off, maybe a leg or two, you name it. But just a point there's this, at least one description where Scarpa refers to the guy and says, I'm gonna shoot your head off, and I'm going to use some foul language here anyway. He said, I'm going to kill you, motherfucker. And interestingly about Scarpa is he did not routinely use foul language, unlike the sort of cliche of a mafia tough guy using the F-bomb every other word. Scarpa stayed away from that. And according to one of his lieutenants, Larry Mazza, his language was actually kind of a step or two above the average wise guy. Kind of putting all that together and trying to figure out what actually happened, I think the best that can be said is that he used some violence, some intimidation, some threats that whoever it was that he was threatening determined the guy meant it, and he gave up the information.
We are only on like episode 14 or 15 here at True Crime Talk, and we are already up to 2 scrotums being cut off. I don't know what the normal rate is for that, but that's where we stand now, unfortunately. So part of this, part of this legend.
I'll give you another one if you want.
Okay.
Well, this is one of the stories that I relate. There were these jewels in this church in Brooklyn that were stolen shortly after they were installed, and the guys that stole them, one of them was murdered, and the story is that Joe Profaci said thought there were 2 guys involved and said, I want a ball from each one of these guys. And that again, that's kind of the legend. And as far as I know, and as far as I can determine from the facts, nothing like that ever happened. One of them was shot to death, and the other one somehow escaped that punishment. But it seems to be, as you've suggested, something that people like to associate with mafia punishment, and whether that's in fact the case. I think it's probably a little bit doubtful. I think that the mafia is more into just shooting people quickly. And in fact, Scarpa's perform method was a snub-nosed .38 caliber, and he used to say, "Put one behind the ear."
Wow, 3 scrotums. I think that's a podcasting record. But yeah, so some of this, part of the legend of how he gets this guy to finally divulge where these bodies have been concealed by the KKK after the murders of the civil rights workers down in Mississippi. Part of that legend is that he takes the guy and he takes him to, he basically abducts him and takes him to a army camp. Is that, do we think that that's true?
Yeah, I think it was, but it wasn't like this super active army post the way you might think of, Fort Dix, New Jersey, or Fort Bragg, but it might have even been something that was barely operational. But yeah, I think that was part of the plan with the FBI, that this is where we're going to interrogate him, and that would be part of the idea to disorient him, get him away from anything that might be familiar, get him out in the woods, get him alone. And so I think that's accurate. Yeah.
Do you know where they eventually recovered those bodies?
Yeah, they did. And as I was saying earlier, in a dam on this guy's property in Philadelphia, Mississippi. And when I remember, I taught U.S. history for 20 years, and I remember hearing about this and thinking, I've got in my mind a dam, okay, like Hoover Dam or something, but it was nothing like that. It was a guy was building a dam with a bulldozer, very much probably like you and I would build a dam, not really knowing what we're doing, just kind of shoving dirt up against a water flow and trying to trap that for agricultural use. And that was in progress, and that's where they decided to bury the bodies, in that dam. And there are some in the FBI files, there are some, and now they're kind of tough to see just because they're Xerox copies of black and white pictures, but you can see this, I would call it a fairly crude dam where the bodies were buried. But the information that Scarpa got pinpointed that.
And for our younger listeners, these murders back then in Mississippi would have been nearly impossible to investigate, because you get down there's so many people that were involved in the KKK or covering up the evil deeds of that organization. And so to run an investigation, as strange as this methodology seems, you had to use something like this to kind of crack the code of silence amongst the Klansmen. And as you said, it made national news. What was going on down there at the time had to be stopped. had to be stopped. And this was a weird way of iron meeting iron to kind of because the Klan was in a weird way just as much like the mafia, but with their own agenda. And it's a very unique thing of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And I don't know, it's a very intriguing story, one that I didn't know anything about. And I think that there was even some of that legend had worked its way into the famous movie Mississippi Burning.
Right.
Let's get into some of his other crimes, more mafia related stuff. And it looks like, I mean, he kind of ran the gamut of all kinds of illegal activity: gambling, loan sharking, hijacking, counterfeiting, assault. We talked about first degree attempted murder, armed robbery. Can you talk about some of his other crimes?
Sure. And just to back up a little, I think your analysis on the Mississippi bit is correct. The sort of gang versus gang, a Brooklyn gang versus a Mississippi gang. And I think that one of the things we have to remember is not only the presence of the Klan, but the fear that the Klan induced in people who weren't Klan members. It might have just been good people, but they knew how dangerous the Klan was. And so I think your analysis is a good one, fighting fire with fire. And but as far as Scarpa's other criminal activities, if money was to be made, Scarpa was going to be involved. And starting from very simple stuff like running numbers and bookmaking, loan sharking, and a lot of that stuff can escalate into violence when people don't have the money that they need to have to pay off their loans or whatever. To hijacking, I mean, these guys were hijacking trucks and shipments out at Kennedy Airport. Some of the stories include Scarpa coming home with duffel bags full of jewelry that had been hijacked, hijacking full truck shipments of appliances. And a lot of the stuff they had inside information on because they had drivers in the union or union members, or they might have even had somebody on the inside at Kennedy Airport. They used to do these bank robberies that were where they would disable the alarm system over the weekend, drill in it's almost like TV, drill into the vault and empty out the vault because they had an inside man at the bank, an inside man at the alarm company, anything that would earn money. Scarpa was willing to try, and that included eventually something that the mafia for a long time considered to be absolute hands off. You can't do that, and that's narcotics. And Scarpa's son in particular was very heavily into narcotics dealing, went to prison for a long time.
Part of the legend of Scarpa is that he would sometimes leave the number 666, the biblical number of the beast, on his victims' pagers. Is there any fact to this? And two, do we know if this was some kind of calling card?
Yeah, I think it was sort of mission accomplished, and back to people who either knew that he was going to be involved in the hit, or he had told and paged them on their pager 666. And that story has been repeated often enough that it has the ring of truth to me. And it adds to the legend of, especially the evil side of the legend. I mean, one U.S. district judge referred to him as the devil. And in fact, Larry Maz's grandmother also referred to him as Scarpa as the devil. And so I think that that might have been a bit of self-promotion that Scarpa was doing, just to make sure everybody knew just how tough and evil he was. And so it rings true to me, and that he was sending that message. And I think it was after accomplishing whatever mission he had to do, and 2 people that were expecting him to do that.
And it looks like he owned homes in multiple states. Did he need to move around for his work with the mafia? And if so, what was the purpose of that? How did that help facilitate what he was up to?
He bought a home for his wife, the mother of his first 4 children, Connie Forrest. He bought a home for her in Lakewood, New Jersey. They never actually divorced. And Scarpa would visit her from time to time, and visit his children from time to time there while they were still living there. So he had a home in New Jersey. He most likely had a place in Florida too, a condominium in Florida. And I don't think this was so much for evading law enforcement as it was for his own personal use or the use of people that were close to him. So, but having said that, the farm in New Jersey did become a place where, from time to time, members of his crew or relatives of his sons actually would go to wait until kind of the heat was off after some big deal had happened. So I don't think that was strictly the purpose for it, but from time to time, the homes outside of Brooklyn, outside of New York City, would get used for that way. He brought up his family for a while in a home on Staten Island, and then they, in the mid-1960s, they moved from Staten Island, and he moved to Brooklyn eventually.
This is a man that seemed to evade punishment from both sides of the table, be it the FBI, law enforcement, or the crime family that he's working for. But he does, if I understand it correctly, he does eventually do some time. Is that correct? Does he ever see prison?
Yeah, towards the end of his life, he had been arrested and was under house arrest. At the time, he was suffering. He was HIV positive, and he was suffering from AIDS at the time. And so the judge sent him home with an ankle bracelet. And towards the end of 1992, he got in a gun battle with some guys that had disrespected his son, some small-time drug dealers. And of course, the ankle bracelet went off, and all the other alarms went off. And after that, he was arrested, and he spent about the last year and a half of his life incarcerated in various facilities until he was sent to a prison hospital in Rochester, Minnesota, and that's where he passed away. But prior to that, he'd only been in jail for 30 days during 30 years of criminal activity, and that was for a very low-level offense. So yeah, he was able to evade punishment from the authorities, and as you suggest, also able to evade punishment from the mafia, even though Carlo Gambino, as early as the early 1970s, warned the members of his family, the Gambino family, to stay away from Scarpa because, as Gambino allegedly put it, Scarpa has a big mouth, and he thought Scarpa was an informant. But he always escaped punishment from his fellow mafiosi.
Yeah, I found that quite intriguing that he was able to go almost 30 years without someone from the mafia doing something. You know, that's a big no-no to be talking with the federal government.
Yeah, one of the ways that he was able to avoid that was by killing people that he thought were informing on him or who had made allegations that he was informing on them. And so it's actually, it's really, as I said, Scarpa's go-to solution was violence. And in that particular context, it was deadly violence because he knew that if he were outed as an informant, then he wouldn't have long to live.
Jonathan, tell the listeners why. I know we kind of did an overview of Scarpa's life and some of the crimes. And even as I pointed out, anybody that helps to take down any part of the KKK, that's some good work in my mind. Tell the listeners a little more about your book, why they should read it. We are only kind of scratching at the surface here. This is a man who, from everything that I can see, spent his entire adulthood committing crimes, and as we had said, working for both sides of the table. There is no shortage of legendary stories that surround this guy and his life.
I think that for people that are interested in true crime, first of all, this is one of the fascinating figures of the 20th century, second half of the 20th century. And it also, I think it tracks nicely the development of the FBI as well, because when Scarpa was first a good fellow in the 1950s and then became a capo, the FBI, under J. Edgar Hoover's direction, was essentially in denial about the existence of organized crime in the United States. And then Kennedy comes in and he takes a different view. He even said so during his campaign in 1960, that organized crime is real and it's a growing threat. And of course, his brother Bobby Kennedy was the Attorney General. We have the Joe Valachi papers. We have that whole sensational bit where both Kennedys are trying to get at this organized crime issue. One of the things that I do with my book is I put this all in historical context, right from the beginning, from Scarpa's mother and father coming in here during the Italian diaspora to Scarpa's finishing high school at the same time that about 10 million soldiers are coming back to the United States, and the effect that might have had on his job opportunities, through the 1950s when the FBI is in denial about organized crime or the mafia or anything like that, into the 1960s when that switches over, then the civil rights movement, and then the explosion of drugs and the importance of drugs in New York City in particular, in places during the 1970s, to when Scarpa becomes HIV positive and the whole AIDS crisis. I put the whole thing in what I think is historical perspective, where it kind of, and the context doesn't excuse or anything like that, but it makes sense to the reader. Okay, this is what was happening in the country. This is what it means in this particular context with this guy and the Colombo family. And then on top of that, I think the whole thing is, it's just shocking that this behavior is going on pretty much under the noses of the FBI. And, they had their motivation to try to catch other people, and they saw Scarpa as a valuable informant. And I think they, either with blinders on or just in denial or self-delusion, told themselves, well, he's worth it. It's worth it. We're making headway against other known criminals. And there are some big investigations in the 1980s that Scarpa clearly had an important hand in furthering by informing on his fellow members of the mafia. So anyway, I think all of that's very interesting. There are a couple other books out there about Scarpa, but I think that I really kind of peel back the layers and parse out what I think is fact versus fiction. And I've got some different analysis in there that people haven't seen before. So I would say all of those, particularly if you're already interested in true crime and interested in the mafia, are reasons to read the book. And if you just happen to want a fascinating and almost unbelievable story, whether it's true crime or not, then I think that person will enjoy the book too.
Prior to us trading some emails about a week or so ago, I knew a little bit about the Colombo crime family, but to learn about this character, Gregory Scarpa, he is beyond fascinating to me. I can't wait to read the book. It's coming out soon. It's going to be available everywhere. Greg Scarpa, Legendary Evil. Our author today is Jonathan Dyer. Jonathan, thank you for joining us here today. We can't wait to read the book.
Well, great. Thanks for having me. And I sure appreciate it. Nice talking to you guys. And best of luck to you.
If you love true crime and you have not typed Wild Blue Press into a search engine, then let me tell you, you have been missing out. Some of the very best in true crime is available from the good folks over at Wild Blue Press. Books like Monster by Steve Jackson, A Special Kind of Evil by Blaine Pardoe and Victoria Hester, The Garden State Parkway Murders by Christian Barth, and this amazing new true crime book, Greg Scarpa, Legendary Evil, The Many Faces of a Mafia Killer, by historian, mafia expert, and Scarpa expert, Jonathan Dyer. That's Wild Blue Press for everything interesting in the world of true crime, books, ebooks, and audio. Make sure that you like, subscribe, and follow True Crime Talk on your listening app, and support True Crime Talk by leaving a positive review so that we can keep bringing to you more great True Crime Talk. Thanks for listening.